It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. The Marc Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And welcome to my listeners here on WHP 580 AM here in central Pennsylvania and iHeartRadio all over the country and all over the world. And our listeners on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live and the other Facebook Lives we've got running. Welcome to the show. Thanks for listening. And if you'd like to check out some prior podcasts of the show or take a look at some of my columns on Penn Live and the Western Journal, or to look at some great merchandise we have, you can check out the marcscaringishow.com website. Follow us on Twitter and YouTube to get updates on the show. And today we're going to talk about the House Impeachment Committee, the House Impeachment Inquiry that's going on in Washington, D.C. in the House Intelligence Committee. I'm sure you're probably at this point all sick to death of hearing about the impeachment inquiry. Several of the day's hearings have been quite the bore. I've had to turn it off a couple of times during my lunch break because it was putting me to sleep. But in the evenings, I turned it back on and took a look and have read parts of the transcripts. And I'm ready to talk about the inquiry with you here today to get your thoughts and concerns about what's going on in Washington with the attempted impeachment of the President of the United States. And you're welcome to call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580, or you can comment live on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live or the others that we've got running. And we've taken calls from all over the country on this issue. Last week or the week before, we heard from a caller in San Francisco who was not all that pleased with what we were saying here on the Marc Scaringi Show. I was just pleased to know that we have a listener in San Francisco, so that was exciting to hear. Well, it appears we've come to the end of the House Intelligence Committee's impeachment inquiry into the President of the United States. I say it appears because we really don't know for certain. It appears that Friday was the last day of public hearings, and at the conclusion of the hearings on Friday, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and the man conducting the impeachment, Adam Schiff, he stated the proceedings are adjourned, which typically means they're over, and the House immediately went into recess for the Thanksgiving holiday. And as an aside, isn't that nice that the House awards itself with a nice long Thanksgiving break? We're not even into Thanksgiving yet, but our elected officials are on break, while most businesses in America get maybe Thanksgiving Day off and perhaps the Friday following. The House of Representatives have given themselves the entire week off, and they're doing so right in the middle of an impeachment inquiry into a sitting U.S. president. One would think that an impeachment would take priority over a vacation, and our duly elected representatives would forestall the holiday in order to complete their impeachment. But nevertheless, here we are. Now, at this point, apparently the House Intelligence Committee will write a report, and will send that report to the House Judiciary Committee, which may or may not hold additional hearings. And if they do hold additional hearings, won't that be a lot of fun? More hearings about who heard what the other didn't say or did say, or what he said or she said, or perhaps he didn't or she didn't say. It does get confusing. The case is a classic he said, she said, but the only one who said anything that counts is the president, and he told Ambassador Sondland he doesn't want anything from Ukraine in exchange for anything. Trump said no quid pro quo. That's when Sondland went to him after all of this hearsay, and he said, she said. Sondland was confused and said to the president, what do you want from Ukraine? The president said, nothing. No quid pro quo. I want nothing in exchange for them doing the right thing. So that should have been the end of the matter, but of course it won't. because our Democratic friends and their allies in the liberal media are intent upon impeaching this president, even though there are no grounds by which they can do that. They'll just manufacture those grounds. But what are the next steps? Getting back to the impeachment inquiry and the process, according to Representative Jamie Raskin, a Democrat of Maryland, and also a Judiciary Committee member, Raskin said the next phase will shift from the facts to the law. And the law means the Constitution, according to Congressman Raskin. So what does that mean? Will we have a debate over the law? Will this be something like oral argument instead of a fact hearing? It sounds like it to me. But let me make one point about this. In the House Resolution 660, that's the House resolution in which Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi laid out these rather truncated rules for conducting the impeachment inquiry. Those rules denied President Trump the right to counsel in the Intelligence Committee hearings, but permitted him the right to counsel in the House Judiciary Committee part of the impeachment process. Well, what happens if the House Judiciary Committee just simply doesn't hold any hearings? Then what's the point of affording the president the right to counsel if there are no hearings? If there are no hearings in which he can call witnesses, his attorney can cross-examine the witnesses, and he can introduce evidence in support of his position in opposition to the evidence being entered by the Democrats who are in favor of impeachment. That's what occurs at hearings. And the House resolution that Nancy Pelosi wrote and passed in the House gives the president the right to counsel only in the House Judiciary Committee. It denied him the right to counsel in the House Impeachment Committee, where the whole impeachment has occurred. And now that committee is writing its report. It's done. It's concluding. And, of course, the report will conclude that the president should be impeached. All done without the president himself having any role, being permitted to play any part in this impeachment inquiry, which has become really a travesty when you deny the man who is accused, when you deny him the right to counsel and the right to defend himself. But nevertheless, here we are. And Representative Debbie Powell of Florida, another Democrat, a member of the Judiciary Committee, she told CNN on Friday, yesterday, we are going to possibly have a couple of hearings to present to the American people what an impeachable offense is. Now think about that. Democrats are going to use the impeachment process to lecture, not themselves because they've already decided they're going to vote to impeach, but to lecture the American people on why they should support the Democrats' vote to impeach. That's what they're going to do in the House Judiciary Committee. They're not going to take facts. They're not going to interrogate witnesses, cross-examine witnesses, apparently. They're not going to give the president the right to counsel and the right to defend himself. Instead, they're going to use the House Judiciary Committee to lecture the American people on what the law says is an impeachable offense. But the American people aren't voting in this impeachment. This is clear evidence that the Democrats know they don't have the American people on their side. They don't have the support of the American people for this impeachment, which is why they're going to take time to try to lecture us, to try to convince us that what we heard during the House Intelligence Committee's fact-gathering, that what we heard there rises to the level of impeachment under the Constitution. So this is going to be a seminar on constitutional law. That's what this impeachment inquiry has become. And that's, of course, not what the founders intended. We'll talk more about the impeachment inquiry when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
On News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. And is that the Blue Oyster Cult Jam I hear in the background there? We need more cowbell, right? That's all we need is a little more cowbell. That's one of the classic American songs that Saturday Night Live did an amazing spoof with, and Christopher Walken was his indelible self. But that's a little bit of a digression. We're talking about the impeachment of the sitting president of the United States. And it looks like the House Intelligence Committee under Adam Schiff has adjourned. It looks like, we're not sure, because kind of the Democrats are pretty much making up the rules as they go, but we think it will now move into the House Judiciary Committee. The Intelligence Committee will submit its report. Obviously, it will call for the impeachment. They'll have a couple of articles of impeachment that they basically will just fabricate. And then we've heard from one Democratic congresswoman who sits on the Judiciary Committee, and she's saying they're going to use that opportunity to lecture the American people on the law of impeachment, which I think is just evidence that they don't have the support of the American people behind their effort, and they're going to try to convince us that we should believe them. Well, under the Constitution, the American people have no role in the impeachment. We don't have a say. You don't have a seat at the table, do you? The American people don't have a representative there in these impeachment hearings. We have no say. It's the members of Congress. It's the members of the House who will vote for or against an impeachment. But they're afraid, they're scared, they don't have the support, so they're going to try to lecture us and teach us that we should support the impeachment, that whatever it is the president said or didn't say that was heard or not heard by 3 or 4 different parties who all say they heard something but not that and this. And at the end of the day, Ambassador Sondland said, well, after all of this confusion, I went to the president. I said, what do you want from Ukraine? The president said nothing. Okay, well, that's it. But in any event, that's not it, and we're going to hear from our Judiciary Committee after they return from their very long Thanksgiving break. They get the whole week off, whereas we simple taxpayers, we get maybe Thanksgiving Day off and the day after. But in any event, the House Intelligence Committee heard from a big witness, a star witness, Fiona Hill, on Friday. Former national security official. Now, Fiona Hill is a naturalized American, raised in Great Britain. And during her testimony, I thought it was rather odd. I don't know if you listened to her testimony, watched it on television, but she was talking about her childhood in Great Britain. She was talking about her middle-class British accent and how it inhibited her career prospects over there in Great Britain. And she was talking about her status as an immigrant to the United States. And I'm thinking, why am I hearing about her childhood, her upbringing, her citizenship status? What does any of that have to do with whether or not the president committed a high crime or misdemeanor? If she were a serious and nonpartisan professional, none of that would matter. Yet instead, we get kind of her sanctifying herself as an immigrant. And of course, if you're an immigrant, you're inoculated from any challenge, any attack. You can't touch an immigrant. They're right there in a sanctified place in American history and American culture. And there's even this absurd exchange during Fiona Hill's testimony before the House Intelligence Committee in which a Democratic congressman uses her immigration status as a foil to denounce President Trump and Republicans as immigrant bashers and immigrant haters. What is this? What does this have to do with the impeachment? So, and she's a so-called, this is Fiona Hill, who was one of the Democrats' star witnesses. She is a so-called expert on Russia. That's how she's described by our friends, the Democrats, because she's supporting their impeachment narrative. She's an expert on Russia. Well, what makes her an expert on Russia? Has she started and managed great businesses in Russia? Has she led armies fighting against the Russians or for the Russians? Has she conducted important public or private sector endeavors in Russia? No, none of those things. She simply studied Russian history in college. Well, so did I. I wonder if that makes me an expert on Russia. After studying Russian history in college, she then went to a liberal think tank, the Brookings Institute, which is a liberal, progressive, globalist think tank that wants the United States to be involving itself all over the world. That's where she sat. And then she was brought into the National Security Council by H.R. McMaster and John Bolton, two very global-minded individuals who want a very strong United States presence around the world. They want us involved in deciding border disputes between Russia and Ukraine. They want us arming Ukrainians. They want a very forceful U.S. presence around the world. That's not liberal, progressive, globalist foreign policy mentality. That's where she comes from. And then ultimately she was fired by President Trump. Why? Well, perhaps because her foreign policy views contradicted the president's. And by the way, as we discussed ad infinitum in prior shows, if you watch these foreign policy so-called experts, these diplomats, from Bill Taylor to Marie Yovanovitch to David Hale and of course Fiona Hill, they all talk about the interagency consensus on what the U.S. foreign policy should be toward Ukraine. But you know what? They don't make foreign policy. They carry out the foreign policy of the President of the United States, who under the Constitution is the chief diplomat of our country and according to Supreme Court decisions is the sole organ of U.S. foreign policy. Fiona Hill, Marie Yovanovitch, Bill Taylor, and others, all of these diplomats you heard testifying before Congress, they should be carrying out the president's foreign policy. So you know what? We don't care what they think. We don't care what their opinions are about what the president should or should not be doing with regard to Ukraine and Russia. Their purpose is to carry out his foreign policy. Because you know what? The American people elected not Marie Yovanovitch, not Bill Taylor, not Fiona Hill. They elected Donald Trump to be president. This is something that is simply lost on our friends in the media down there in Washington, D.C. They're not covering this aspect of this charade that's going on. And Fiona Hill is another example of what is wrong with our federal government. Here is a person who has accomplished really nothing of significance in her private or public life, and now she's supposed to be guiding U.S. foreign policy. And now, since Democrats and Fiona Hill herself, since they focused on her immigration status during her hearings the other day and how that was a supposed virtue, and that somehow gives her a more adept or a sharper insight into what is the national security interest, what's in the best interest of the United States. She somehow has a greater insight into that because she comes from Great Britain. Well, I'm going to take a moment and just give you an opposing point of view. And that is, one could say that Fiona Hill, now we know that she's not a natural-born U.S. citizen. And that's the same with Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who testified against the president in support of this conspiracy theory that there was bribery or a quid pro quo. We also heard from Marie Yovanovitch, the former Ukrainian ambassador who was recalled by President Trump. She's not a natural-born U.S. citizen. She's a Ukrainian. Colonel Vindman's a Ukrainian, and Fiona Hill is a Brit. These are the key people in this conspiracy theory. They obviously despise the president, and they despise the president's America First foreign policy. And there is a reason why the Founding Fathers wrote into the Constitution that only a natural-born U.S. citizen is eligible to become president. And as we've said, the president's the chief diplomat of the U.S. He's the sole organ of U.S. foreign policy. The Founding Fathers wanted to make sure that only a man who was born in America and thus is ostensibly deeply rooted in the culture, in the history, in the tradition of America, and thus is a patriot by birth, only that man or woman who is a natural-born citizen is permitted to be president, is permitted to conduct our relations with the rest of the world. The idea was they will not be corrupted by their place of birth. Corrupted, not necessarily in a malignant way, but possibly in a benevolent way. In any event, the Founding Fathers wanted only a natural-born U.S. citizen to be president because that president would put the interests of America and the American people first, before the interests of his parents or the interests of himself if they were born in Ukraine or Russia or Italy or France or any other country. That's in the Constitution. That was debated in the Constitutional Convention. So I have a suggestion, and that is for individuals who apply for positions in the State Department and in any of the 17 intelligence agencies that our federal government runs and operates, perhaps they should be a natural-born U.S. citizen. Perhaps they should be a natural-born American, because we want to make sure that their sympathies, that their allegiance, their ties are directly connected to the United States of America and not to the place of their birth. This might sound outlandish to modern ears, but I don't think it was back during our founding. But anyway, that's a little bit of a digression there. Back to Fiona Hill and her testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. She made some statements that have been touted by liberals and Democrats, but I think they actually reveal her high level of incompetence in not appreciating what is in the actual national interest of the United States. For example, before I get into these examples, we're going to take a brief commercial break. We're talking about the impeachment inquiry in the United States Congress moving from the House Intelligence Committee to the Judiciary Committee. And I want to take some comments from Harrisburg 100 Facebook and other Facebooks. And I want to take some calls. When we return from this brief commercial break, you're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show. And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. And you're welcome to tune in on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live and the other Facebook Lives we've got running today. And you can comment live or call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. We heard from Fox News that Bernie Sanders is disgusted that the new Democrat who's coming in to the presidential race, Michael Bloomberg, has spent $31 million on television ads, that he's trying to essentially buy the election. I think that's interesting in that Bernie Sanders lost the Democratic primary to Hillary Clinton, who was in collusion with the Democratic National Committee to throw the election against Sanders and for Hillary Clinton. Yet he then, of course, stood with her and endorsed her and supported her candidacy. So a little selective outrage there from Bernie Sanders. Apparently not too many Democratic voters are feeling the burn that they once did back in 2016. We're talking about the impeachment inquiry that's going on in the United States Congress and how after our duly elected members of Congress return from their nice long Thanksgiving break, they're going to go into the House Judiciary Committee next, where we're going to receive lectures from Democrats on the law of impeachment, which I think should be interesting. They need to convince the American people to support their cause. They have the votes. They should just vote for it if they believe the president has committed a high crime or misdemeanor, but they know the country is not with them. So instead of holding evidentiary hearings in the Judiciary Committee, apparently what we're going to get are lectures on the law and why we should agree that those various facts, the he said, she said, and all of that confusing hearsay, third-hand presumptions and opinions and speculations and hypotheticals, all of that, they're going to teach us equals a high crime or misdemeanor. I think that's going to be a real tough sell. But anyway, that's what we have to look forward to. And we're breaking down the testimony of Fiona Hill, the British-born former member of the National Security Council, and how she has a very different view of reality, in my view. She testified before Congress. Some of you on this committee appear to believe that Russia and its security services did not conduct a campaign against our country, and that perhaps somehow, for some reason, Ukraine did. This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016. Now, first of all, I'm not so sure that Russians buying some Facebook ads and running some Facebook pages where they supported Hillary Clinton and supported Donald Trump and others, I'm not so sure that is an attack on our democratic institution. I think that's just some foreigners buying Facebook ads and making statements about U.S. politics. But in any event, her entire statement is patently false. First of all, Republicans on the committee to which she was testifying have issued a report stating they believed Russia attempted to interfere or meddle in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. So the first part of her statement's false. And second, the Ukrainian government, through several Ukrainian government officials, did also interfere or meddle, if that's the word you want to use, in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. We have Ukrainian prosecutors and members of the Ukrainian parliament releasing secret financial records of Paul Manafort, Trump's then campaign manager. Why? Well, designed to damage the Trump campaign in the summer of 2016, and it succeeded. Paul Manafort resigned. The Trump campaign had to deal with all of these ridiculous allegations that the Trump campaign and Trump were somehow in collusion with the Russians. How did that narrative start? Well, it was the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian prosecutor and a couple of members of parliament who got that dirt out into the public. We have members of the Ukrainian embassy in the United States of America meeting and cooperating with a Democratic National Committee campaign consultant to dig for dirt on the Trump campaign. Now, that's some sort of collusion on some level, and we have members of the Ukrainian government writing op-eds attacking and denouncing then-candidate Trump. So where was Fiona Hill, this high-ranking, sanctified, British-born member of the U.S. National Security Council? Where was she during all of this? Did she not see any of this? Did she not read about any of this? It's been all over the news. Yet she denounces Republicans falsely for denying that the Russians made an attempt to meddle in our elections, and then falsely states that Ukraine did nothing of the sort when it did. And that's what Trump is bothered about. And this is his national security, one of his national security officers. Of course, Trump doesn't even know who Fiona Hill is. Trump barely knows any of these people who testified. He doesn't know many of the people who were testifying as to what he said. He doesn't know them, never met them, never spoke to them, yet they're testifying as to what he said. And this is further evidence of why there's such a great disconnect between much of the Department of State and the national security apparatus that Trump is in charge of. These people report to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is looking and saying, there's evidence, there's lots of credible evidence that Ukraine colluded with the Democratic National Committee to meddle in the 2016 presidential election. We have sworn affidavits in a Ukrainian court. We have op-eds written by members of the Ukrainian government denouncing Trump, attacking Trump, digging dirt, spreading false, well, in the Paul Manafort case, it was probably true, spreading dirt about the Trump campaign, all coming from Ukraine, from their government. And Trump is thinking, what's going on? Why is this occurring? And did you hear any of the Democrats' witnesses, Marie Yovanovitch, one of their star witnesses, who, by the way, is Ukrainian, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, one of the Democrats' star witnesses against Trump, who, by the way, is Ukrainian, Fiona Hill, one of the Democratic star witnesses against Trump, who, by the way, is British. Did you hear any of them actually reporting the real news of the Ukrainian government's involvement in trying to ensure that Trump was not elected president? Now, why did Ukraine not want Trump to win? Because Trump was not rattling the saber, saying that he's going to attack Russia to defend Ukraine against this Russian aggression in the Crimea. So naturally, the Ukrainians wanted Hillary Clinton because she's the warmonger. She's the one who wants to go to war. She wants the United States to go to war against Russia to throw it out of the predominantly Russian eastern part of Ukraine. That's what's at the bottom of this. Anyway, Fiona Hill called this a fictional narrative, and I think that's just evidence of her delusion. And no wonder why Donald Trump ignored her advice in the advice of others. She also stated, this is Fiona Hill, one of the Democrat star witnesses, and she's touted as a as a heroine all over the liberal media today and yesterday. Fiona Hill also stated that President Putin and the Russian security services operate like a super PAC. They deploy millions of dollars to weaponize our own political opposition research and false narratives. When we are consumed by partisan rancor, we cannot combat these external forces as they seek to divide us against each other, degrade our institutions, and destroy the faith of the American people in our democracy. That was Fiona Hill saying that Putin and the Russians operate like a super PAC. They deploy millions of dollars to weaponize our own political opposition research. Really? They politicized, the Russians politicized our own opposition research. Wasn't it Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee that hired the British foreign agent to dig dirt in Russia and make up stories, fabricate stories? Remember the P dossier, the dodgy dossier, the dirty dossier, whatever you want to call it? That was fabricated dirt paid for by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee, and it was used to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. I mean, this is a remarkable example of just pure obliviousness from Fiona Hill and the others who support what she was testifying to before the House Intelligence Committee. It wasn't the Russians or Vladimir Putin who were weaponizing our own political research to interfere in our presidential election. It was Hillary Clinton, the Democratic National Committee, who paid for it and who used it. They tried multiple times to leak it to the news media in the late summer and early fall of 2016. They eventually got a couple extremely discreditable news organizations to run it. And so in the lead up to the general election in 2016, there were news reports about Russia and Trump collusion, the P dossier, all of that stuff. That was from Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's just, why isn't Fiona Hill castigating the Democrats, Hillary Clinton, the DNC, the Obama administration for colluding with foreign nationals in Great Britain and in Russia to dig for dirt, all of it false, put it into our presidential election to dirty Donald Trump? That's what Fiona Hill, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, Bill Taylor, David Hale, and the others, all part of our foreign policy establishment and our national security apparatus, that's what they should be up in arms about. But yet, not a pin drop about that. And in fact, they just flip it on its head and they use it to try to smear the president. More about the impeachment inquiry when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show. And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. And you can listen to us on iHeartRadio on their app. You can download it onto your mobile device and listen to us all across the country and around the world if you'd like. Today we're talking about the House impeachment inquiry. And I know I'm talking a lot about this lovely lady, Fiona Hill, a British-born American now, actually formerly a member of the National Security Council Advisory something or other. She had something to do with the Ukrainian policy. Donald Trump never met her, doesn't know who she is, never spoken to her, but yet she is front and center in the Democrats' attack against President Trump, which is really just a kind of a camouflage for what the Democrats have been doing, colluding with Ukraine to interfere in the 2016 presidential election, which is now very well documented. But will there be an investigation in the House? Absolutely not. I'm pleased to see that Senator Lindsey Graham over there on the Senate Judiciary Committee on the Senate side is actually showing some kahunas here and actually beginning to undertake the type of investigation that is truly necessary. What went on in Ukraine in 2016? Why were Ukrainian government officials trying to interfere in our 2016 presidential election? You and I know why. We just discussed that they weren't happy with Trump because Trump's not a saber-rattling warrior who wants to take the U.S., United States of America, to war against Russia. to allow Ukraine to continue to control, govern the Russians who happen to live in the eastern province of Ukraine. It's a boundary dispute. At the heart of this Russia-Ukrainian crisis is a boundary dispute on the eastern border of Ukraine. And by the way, Ukraine has been a part of Greater Russia for about 300 years, since Catherine the Great. No U.S. president has ever declared war on Russia or the Soviet Union, or once again now the Russian Federation, to liberate Ukraine. We never did. That was never part of any foreign policy of any U.S. president. So when these members of the deep state, if you will, the State Department, the National Security Intelligence Agencies, there are 17 of them for crying out loud. Why can't we just have one would think? They are all pro-liberal, progressive, globalist foreign policy. They repeatedly talked about how it was long the tradition of U.S. foreign policy that Trump was breaching, that Trump was violating. That's absolutely false. First of all, former President Barack Obama, whom they all emulate, he did not give military aid to Ukraine. He rejected military aid to Ukraine. It was President Trump who's the first one to actually give Ukraine military aid. Now, I don't think he should have. I disagree with that policy, but Congress appropriated the money, so what's he going to do? He's got to follow the law, right? But no U.S. president has ever lifted a finger for Ukraine in its centuries-long struggle with Russia. So why would we ever get involved in that boundary dispute? And by the way, the Crimea, the eastern Ukraine is over 80% Russian. Those are Russians. They speak Russian. They want to belong to Russia. They don't want to continue to be governed by Ukrainians who they believe are an occupying force. I mean, this is how boundary disputes involving various ethnicities happen all around the world throughout history. Why would the United States of America ever get involved in this? It's baffling to me. But yet, this is what is on front and center on the minds of every single one of these witnesses who testified for the Democrats. They were just visibly and palpably upset by President Trump's new foreign policy, which is actually the ancient foreign policy of the United States of America, to stay the heck out of those boundary disputes. In any event, Fiona Hill, back to Fiona Hill, she's being trumpeted by liberals and Democrats as a feminist hero. And in my view, that's more false narratives. I mean, strong, independent women, which is what feminists are supposed to be, they don't trade water cooler gossip. They don't come to Congress and testify about hearsay after hearsay and then lecture Republicans about immigration when they're there to testify about impeachment, and then falsely accuse Republicans of being deniers about Russian attempts to influence our election, and then admonish us not to investigate actual Ukrainian interference in our elections and actual corruption, or at least credible allegations of corruption involving former U.S. President Joe Biden and Ukraine. That's what a real feminist would do. That's what a real strong, independent woman would do. She would speak truth to power. But that's not what she did. Now, if you haven't watched Congressman Turner, a Republican congressman, when he basically excoriates Fiona Hill, and he does a brilliant job for her various false statements, and it's on YouTube, you can Google it. But he is now being condemned as a male chauvinist. He was condemned by one of his fellow Democratic Congresswomen on the committee for mansplaining, whatever that is. He just rips into Fiona Hill for her various false statements. And he did a great job. That's not being anti-woman or anti-feminist. That's treating this female former National Security Council member as an equal and giving it to her like he would anybody else, challenging her statements, some of which were false, as he revealed. And during this exchange, he utters this devastating line. He says, quote, "No matter how convinced we are, Dr. Hill, no matter how much we believe we know that what we heard is true, it is still just what we heard. Do you want to be the laughing stock of history to impeach the president because he did not take a meeting?" I mean, those were two devastating lines delivered by this congressman to Fiona Hill, who is a heroine now by the liberal media and the Democrats. No matter how much we believe we know that what we heard is true, it is still just what we heard. That's it. We've had 2 weeks now of individuals testifying to what they heard, someone else say, that someone else heard, that someone else said about what President Trump said or thinks. That's where we are. These are the grounds upon which Democrats are going to impeach a sitting president. That, I do not believe, is a strong example of heroic feminism, coming into a congressional hearing and just talking about hearsay after hearsay after hearsay and making false allegations that are obviously false and proven to be false by Congressman Turner, that Republicans basically ignored Russian meddling in 2016 and then fabricated Ukrainian meddling in 2016. I don't know about you, but if I were a member of the Department of State or the national security apparatus and I had any involvement in determining foreign policy or implementing foreign policy or national security involving Ukraine, I would spend my time getting to the bottom of these very credible allegations of Ukrainian corruption involving former Vice President Joe Biden and his corruption, getting a prosecutor who was investigating his son who sat on the board of Burisma, the largest natural gas company in Ukraine that was founded by the former ecology minister who used his power as ecology minister to grant licenses to Burisma, the company he owned and founded. There's the corruption. Investigate that. But they won't. And that's really the heart of the matter here. And this House impeachment inquiry has been chasing one shadow after another. When we have corruption in Ukraine involving a former vice president of the United States and his son staring us right in the face. And you can't ask Joe Biden about it. He'll snap back at you. He'll attack you for asking him why, why did you think it was okay? Why did you think it wasn't a conflict of interest for you to be the point man during the Obama administration in delivering aid and assistance to Ukraine and purportedly rooting out corruption in Ukraine when your son was put on the board of governors of the largest natural gas company in Ukraine that was founded by the former ecology minister who was being investigated for corruption? You don't think that presents a problem? No, you can't even ask Joe Biden about that. If you do, you're anti-American. The President of the United States of America cannot even suggest to the new Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump can't even suggest to him, hey, Volodymyr, what's the nickname for Volodymyr? I'm not so sure. Hey, Zelensky, what's going on over there in your country? You're members of your Ukrainian parliament, members of your foreign policy team. They were colluding with members with the Democratic National Committee consultant to interfere in a presidential election. Let's get to the bottom of this, Volodymyr. Before we give you another $500 million in aid, why don't we get to the bottom of this? And I want our president to be looking out for and rooting out corruption in foreign countries that we're giving millions of dollars to. As I've explained in past shows, I don't think we should be giving any foreign aid. The United States of America is about 20-some trillion dollars in debt. There's no way out of our debt crisis. This country is further than bankrupt. If there's even a term for more than bankrupt, that's where the United States of America is. Yet we still find $500 million to send over to the Ukrainian government so that they can, so that their military can be used to try to get the Russians out of eastern Ukraine that's predominantly Russian. That's the absurdity of where we are today. And I'm sorry I didn't take the time to take some calls today. We'll try to do that next week, but I had a lot to say about these impeachment hearings going on in our nation's capital. I want to thank you all for tuning in and listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. Tune in every Saturday at 1 p.m.